Hey, how's it going? This is Chris Da Silva, and in today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use React, Apollo, and GraphQL. So I found this pretty simple API called Ball Don't Lie. It's all about the NBA and information on teams and players and scores and things like that. If you're not into sports or the NBA, don't worry. You can still use the toolkit that I set you up with to work with any sort of API that you want to. I just chose this one because the documentation is clear, the setup's easy, there's no API keys to deal with, any of that kind of stuff. Just to illustrate the point, and I'm trying to keep this around an hour, so I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Feel free to pause and take breaks as needed throughout, but let's go ahead and dive in. So I've got an empty directory here. I called it NBA scoreboard. The first step is to npm init. And we can enter through most of this stuff. Package name's fine, version, description. Entry point, I'm going to change to server.js just for the sake of clarity. And then you can put your name for the author if you want to. Doesn't really matter. Cool. So now we've got our package.json. Next thing that we're going to do is take care of any of the dependencies that we're going to need, just to get it out of the way. So we're not going to use all of these right away, but we will at some point. So we'll do npm install. We'll use Axios, concurrently, cores, express dash GraphQL. Broke onto another line in my terminal, but it is all together, express dash GraphQL. GraphQL and moment. So this will take a second to pull in all this information. We'll see node modules folder get generated if things go according to plan. There it is. And then we'll see our dependencies populate. There we go, in our package.json. The one other thing that we need as a dev dependency that we wouldn't actually ship out into production is called nodemon. And we need a different command for that. So we'll do npm install nodemon dash big D as a dev dependency. And so nodemon is a tool that will automatically restart our server for us so that we don't have to do it manually every time we make an update to our project. So we're in our scripts, and we're going to add a new one called server. And we're going to use nodemon. And we're going to tell it to just follow the directions that it finds in server.js. We haven't made server.js, so let's go ahead and do that now. In the root directory, let's make a new file called server.js. And we are going to pull in express. We're going to grab something called GraphQL HTTP from express-GraphQL. And then we're going to make reference. Oh, I spelled that wrong, I realize. GraphQL, there we go. And then we're going to make reference to a file that we haven't created yet. It's going to be called schema, and it's going to be where we do all of our data structuring and whatnot. So schema is equal to require, and this file will be in the same directory, so we can do ./schema. So those are all the imports that we need for now. Common practice you'll see is that whenever you're making an Express app, you'll store the Express call in a variable called app. So we did that there on line 5. And then next, let me type this out, and then I'll explain what's going on. So /GraphQL, GraphQL HTTP, takes in an object, schema, and graphical set to true, and save. All right. So what we're doing here is we're telling the app to use this GraphQL HTTP module. And this module is going to make reference to the schema file, which we haven't made yet, but we will. And then it's going to say that we want to use this interface called graphical. If you've ever used Gatsby before, Gatsby comes loaded with graphical, and it allows you to see all of your data. So any GraphQL data calls that you make, you'll be able to see in the browser without actually having to like build anything on the client side. So it's good for testing and making sure all of your data works before you start building out your client side. And it, you don't have to do all like the console logging and that kind of stuff the entire way. So it's pretty nice. And all this is doing is saying, we're gonna have localhost 5000 for this server. So at localhost 5000 / GraphQL, that's where we'll see our graphical interface. So that's what's going on there. Next, we'll set up our port to either find the process.env.port, and if it can't, then just go to 5000. And then lastly, we'll app.listen at our port. And just to make sure that we're seeing something to let us know that the server has started, we'll console.log and then backtick server started on port, and then $curly braces port. So we just use a little string interpolation to anytime the server starts, we want to know that it's starting. So in our console, in our terminal here, it'll give us that little notification. So if we ran this right now, if we ran npm run server, we'd get an error because we're making reference to this schema file that doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and make it. In the root directory, we'll do new file schema.js. And even though nothing is in there, we can go ahead and start our server just because that file exists now. So we'll do npm run server and started on port 5000. So that's here. So we can't get anything because we haven't like set anything up yet, but we can see that it's working in our terminal here in VS Code. So let's get to building out the schema. The schema is how we're going to define how we want our, like what data that we want in the first place, and then how we want that data to be structured. So I mentioned we're going to be using this API called ball don't lie. The first endpoint that we're going to be hitting is for the teams. So this is the endpoint here. And whenever you hit that, you'll get an array of data back with all of the teams information. So if I actually paste this into a tab here, whoops. So copy and paste. This is the data that we're going to end up getting back. So all 30 teams. So you see 29 there because it starts at 0. So that's what we're going to be getting back. So in schema, we're going to use this information to get our data like set up in the way that we want it. So first, we're going to import Axios. We're not going to use that right away, but we'll get it out of the way for our imports so we don't forget later. The first type that we're going to create is we're going to call it team type. And it will be a new GraphQL object type. The schema doesn't know what this is yet because we haven't imported it. So we'll do that now. And we're going to have a series of GraphQL somethings. In this case, it's object type. We're going to have strings and ints and stuff later. So for now, open up a set of curly braces and put in GraphQL object type. And that is equals require GraphQL. So we're getting that from GraphQL. Cool. So now this object type takes in an object, and you need to give it a name. So we'll call it team, and that's the name of this object of information that we're getting back. And then you need to tell it what fields it should be pulling. So the fields takes in an object. The fields function, takes in this object here. And We're just going to get this information over here. So you can see that we've got a couple of strings and then one integer. So let's go ahead and just pull those. So first one is ID, and the type is a GraphQL int. I'm going to copy this and add it to our list of modules that we're pulling in from GraphQL. Next is going to be, I don't care about the abbreviation for now. Let's do city. And the type is a GraphQL string. And we need to add that to our list up here. And then we'll do conference, which is a string. The rest of these will just be strings, so we won't need to import anything else. Conference division. And then we'll do full name, full underscore name, GraphQL string, and then name, which is just the nickname. And again, I'm just getting that all of that from here. So the reason that I had full underscore name here is because full underscore name is how the guys that the people that made Ball Don't Lie's API decided that it would be returned. So that's our first type. We're going to make one more type, which is a game type. So since we're making a scoreboard, we want to get information on specific games and get the scores, and if we're looking in the future, like what time is the game at, what are the dates. So this will be a GraphQL object type as well. It needs a name, which we will say is game as a string. Game. And then get a comma there, and then the fields here. So we have an arrow function, parentheses, curly braces. So to show you what I'm getting here, this is the data that we'll get back for games. So we have information about the game itself, which is referenced by an ID. And that's not the team ID, that's the ID of this game. So if we just did a game by its ID, so if we get a specific game by its ID, we would only get, if we didn't make reference to our team type, we'd only get this information. So I'm going to show you how we get the team information as well based off of what we already put together for our team type. Okay, so a decent bit of explaining there. Let's go ahead and build it. So the first field is going to be the ID, and the type is an int, GraphQL int. Then we're going to want the date, which comes back as a string. Then the home team score, which is an int. The visitor team score, which is an int. The home team, and notice over here that the home team is an object that looks exactly the same as our teams object here that we just made. So because we made that type up here, the type of for home team is actually going to be that team type that we already have up here. So it's going to return a team type object. We're going to do the same thing for visitor team. And then the last thing that we'll grab is the status. So is the game done? If so, what was the score? If it's in the future, what time is it at? If it's in the third quarter, you know, that sort of thing. And that's going to come back as a string. Awesome. So we have our two types that we're going to be using. You can create more if you want to extend this project, but this is all we're going to be using for now. So in order to actually make these do something, first of all, we're going to need to build something called a root query, which kind of combines all of our the queries that we want, the GraphQL queries that we want, and tells the application which endpoints to hit. So we'll say const root query equals new GraphQL object type. So this will take in a name, which is, we'll call root query type. And then it takes in fields as well. And so these fields are the queries that we want. So we might have a query for a specific game if we want to know the score of a specific game. We might have a query for more information about a specific team if we want to like click on a team and see what conference they're in or what city they're from, that sort of thing. So the first one that we're going to do is a teams query, and we're going to structure that by giving it a type of a new GraphQL list. So it's going to give us a list of team types. So it's just going to we're telling it to expect an array of team type objects. Since GraphQL list is new, we have to paste that to our list of GraphQL things there at the top. And then we're going to write a resolver. So we'll set this up as an async function, async resolve, and it takes in parent and args. And first we'll try to get a response, and we'll set that to a variable called response. Await, and then we're getting this API here, this endpoint. So await axios dot get, and then parentheses. I'm going to hit enter to put it on a new line, and then quotes. I'm going to paste in that URL. Then data is going to be our response. And then I'm just going to show you what we're getting. Console log data, and then we have to have our catch block. Catch error. Oops. Console.error. Our error. All right, so if I save that. So what I'm going to do here, oh, and one last step that I need to do is actually export this. So we'll do module.exports equals new GraphQL schema, which is a new one that we haven't used yet. So copy and then comma paste. It auto formatted it for me, so if it looks a little different, I'm just adding it to this object, or this list of named imports. And then new GraphQL schema, and the query that we're giving it is the root query here. So now we save. Cool, our server has started, if we're on localhost 5000, if we go to, remember we did localhost or this app.use/GraphQL. So if we go to localhost 5000/GraphQL, and I get rid of this, I'll refresh this here. Okay, cool. So we got a blank graphical interface. So this is kind of like our little testing data playground. It's going to show us all of the different GraphQL data calls that we can make. So if you open up a set of curly braces, and then on PC, if you do control space, on Mac, it's either option or command space. It'll give you a list of all the available queries. So this is a good sign that we're getting teams here because we made that teams query in our root query. So if we named this something else, it's going to pop up whatever we name it here underneath this first fields object. So if we do teams, it's going to give me a red squiggly because the teams is supposed to return a list of team types. So if we go back up to team types, remember, you can grab the ID, the city, you can grab any of this information. You don't have to grab all of it. You can grab whatever you want. So let's do curly braces, and then let's grab the ID, the city, and the full name. All right, so remember, we are console logging the data. We're not exactly sure. We know we're eventually going to get this data back, but we don't know exactly what it looks like yet. So if I hit play, this shows up as null, but if you notice my terminal, there's no errors or anything, so that's good, and it's giving us a whole bunch of information. Let's see, the couple of good signs. Number one, it has our response URL, which is the endpoint that we called here in our query. And then another good sign is you can see this data array with a bunch of objects. And if we look at the meta, the total count is 30. And coincidentally, there are 30 teams in the NBA. So we're definitely on the right track. So if we look here, data is giving us all of this stuff. And then, so it's giving us this huge object. Another object within data is a data object, which then contains a data array of seemingly what the information is that we want. So let's go in a little bit deeper and do data.data and see what we get. So if we run, I'll refresh this. If we run that query again, now we're starting to see the information about teams, which is good. So now we're seeing specific teams. But again, this data call is giving us, and it ran it twice because I hit play, or I like restarted it and then I hit play, so it made the call twice. But that data.data is giving us an object with a data array with all the teams and then this meta information. So if we do data.data.data again and hit save, and now I hit play here, now we can see it looks the same, but we don't have that meta. We just have the array of objects of all of our teams here. And so this is what we want as far as pulling data and then eventually displaying it on the client side. So now, okay, we don't see it here. Why does it say null? Because we're console logging, we're not returning. So if we hit return and then get rid of that closing parenthesis. And now if we hit play, now we've got all of that information. Pretty friggin' sweet. So we could also, if we want to pull in like the conference play, cool. Now we've got the conference of each team. So anything that we defined in our team type here, ID, city, conference, division, full name, and name, we could make a call from using we can make a call for using GraphQL. And when we get into building the client side, this is going to be super helpful. So we've made, we can call all teams, but what if we want a specific team? So let's go ahead. If we look here, so teams, I'm going to click that curly brace so I can see which one it connects with. I'm going to do a comma. And now I'm going to add another field called team. And now we'll define what that query looks like. So the team is going to be a team type. So when you make a call for a specific team, it's going to return a team type. And this one, we actually need to define args. So I'll type it and I'll explain it. So what this is saying is, so notice that this huge array, each team has an ID and a city and a name. We're saying that we're going to give it the ID. We're going to let it know which ID it needs. And then it's going to give you specific information about that team. And the reason I structured it that way is because if you want a specific team, according to this API, you need to hit this endpoint and then after the last slash, give it the ID of the team to retrieve. So in this case, you can see that v1/team/14 gives you the information for the LA Lakers. So that's what we're going to do, and that's why we're giving it this args parameter here. All right, and so then after that, now we just kind of do the same deal that we did before with our resolver. So async resolve parent and args try const response is await axios dot get. And for this one, I'm going to do backticks. I'm going to grab this endpoint here without the quotes and paste it inside. And then I'm going to do slash $, curly braces, args.id. So what this is going to do is it's going to take in these args.id, so it's just like an object, args.id, and it's going to pop it onto the end of this endpoint so that I can get the team that I'm looking for based on their ID. And then same sort of deal, so const data equals await response. And then this one, I know how it's structured. I'm not going to go through the whole console logging again. It's just going to be data.data based on what's returned, and then we'll catch the error by console.erroring it. And we'll save. So now we should be able to get a specific team. So notice teams and now team. If I give it the ID of 5 and then whatever information I want about that team. So I want the city and the name and the ID. I hit play. Cool. Chicago Bulls, ID 5. That makes sense because that's the ID that I gave it. So now we can query for specific teams based on how we set up this team query in our root query. So it's starting to come together now. We can get all of the teams. We can get individual teams. Next, what we want to do is grab the games. So we got our team. Let's add a comma there, and we'll do all games. And let's see what that endpoint is. So for games, get all games. This is the endpoint that we're going to be using, and we're going to add some query parameters to give it a little bit more context. Because if you hit just this endpoint, let's see what we get. So we get January 30th, 2019, February 9th, 2019. So we're getting some like kind of weird random information, which is fine. That's why the folks that designed this gave you the option of putting in query parameters. So I'll show you how to set that up so that we can get specific games without getting a bunch of like random ones from like a year ago. So for all games, this is going to be a list. So a new GraphQL list. And this time, similar to the teams that we got a team type, this one we're going to get a game type, which is going to give us this information that we set it up for in the beginning with our game type. We also want args for this. And in this case, the args that we're going to give it the one argument that we're going to give it is the date, which is going to be a string. And so what we're going to do here is one of the query parameters that you can give it is the dates. We're actually going to do start date and end date. And we're going to set those to the same date so that eventually what we'll do is we'll have a little date picker and we'll be able to see games on any given date. So like all the games that are happening next week on Tuesday, or all of the games that are happening today, or all the scores from yesterday, you'll be able to see specific dates. And you can mess around with these different parameters as well, but that's how we'll set ours up. So that's our args, and then now we've got our resolver. So async resolve parent args, and then we'll try again our response is going to be equal to await axios.get. And so we have backticks. We're going to take this endpoint and we're going to add some stuff to it. All right, so games slash, and we're going to use that, like I said, the start date and end date. So to start off query parameters, we have the question mark, and then we have start date equals, and then it's going to take in the args.date that we give it. And then notice here, so if you have the query params that you want, if you want a second one, you just have the ampersands there. So we'll do and underscore date, which I'm getting here, equals $args.date. So you'll notice that's the same exact information. Why are we having start date and end date both take in whatever date that we give it? Again, what we're doing there is we're making sure that, so if we just had start date, it would give us all of the games from the start date and beyond. So if we had start date of like October 15th, 2018, it would give us all of the games from that start date up until now and any scheduled games that are on the API. And we don't want that. That's, I mean, you might, but and you could set up ways to like set up ranges of dates if you want to. But for this application, we're just going to set the start and the end date to the same so that we limit it to I only want games from this specific date. And then the rest is pretty similar. So we have data equals await response. And then for this one, just like our teams, we're going to return data.data.data. And we're going to catch any errors just by console logging them. Console erroring. Cool. So now if we refresh, we should have a new option here, and we do all games. So all games takes in a date, and that is expecting it to be in year, month, day. So let's try. And it's expecting it as a string. So that's why I'm putting it in quotes. So let's do 2020 10:01. And let's do home team score and visitor team score. Let's see what we get. Okay, nothing. Let's see, maybe I have my date just backwards here. Cool. So we have all games, and we have home team score and visitor team score, but this is not super useful because it's just giving us these scores. So remember, where did we do it? In our game type, remember that we have home team as one of the data fields that we're getting back, and that's going to return a team type. And so if we look at our get all games, we've got our home team and visitor team score already. If we want the home team information and the visitor team information, then all we need to do is make those calls. So home team, and remember from before, the home team needs to have some information. So we'll do city, ID, and name. And we'll do the same thing for visitor team. We'll do city, ID, and name. And so now we have this array with all of the games that happened. Let's see, we have date. We do have date. Okay. So here's the date that we're getting back. So January 10th, 2020, the Bulls faced the Pacers and lost 116-105. And so now we're getting all of that information. So this is starting to become pretty cool here. We're going to do one more where if we don't want every single game and we just want an individual team's game, like say we just want the games for the Bulls, then we'll be able to do that. So one more in our root query. So find the end of all games, comma, we'll do team games. And the type is going to be a new GraphQL list. And it's going to give us a list of games. The args are going to be, we're going to give an ID. And the type is going to be an int. We are going to set up our resolver with parent and args. Set up our try block with a response, await, Axios, .get. And for this one, what I'm doing is if I want a specific game, I need the ID of the game to retrieve. So we got to do a little bit of like a workaround sort of situation here. What we can do is we can get an array of team IDs. So if we can find the team IDs, if we can pull in that information through an argument, then we can slap this on as a query parameter to our all games and then use it as like kind of a filter to make sure that we're only getting games for the team that we want. So that endpoint is going to be the same that we've been using. So I'll just copy the first part from here. And then delete that trailing slash and do question mark team underscore IDs and then square brackets equals $args.id. And then we're actually going to use that moment library here because the API returns the date to us in this format. But if we want to use query parameters, we need it in this format. We can use moment to format it for us. And if you haven't checked out Moment, that'll be one of the links to their documentation that I leave in the description. So check down there for some notes and some links to docs. But Moment is going to help us format this so that it can automatically generate the arguments that we need. So what we're going to do is we're going to get the ID and we're going to tack on the start date to equal $ curly braces. We need to import moment at the top. So we'll do const moment equals require moment. And then, sorry, just taking a look at my notes. Okay, so moment. And so we'll call it, and then we're going to chain a few of the like moment methods on it. And I'll type them out and then I'll explain. So dot subtract 7, days. Dot format y dash dash dd. Okay, so that's our first. We're gonna set the start date where we're gonna find the date from the API, and we're gonna use moment to subtract 7 days from it. So we're gonna get like the previous week's worth of games, and then we're gonna format it to the format that the API wants, which is this, and that's why I formatted it that way. So we need to do that one more time so that takes care of our start date parameter. And now we need one more, which is our end date. So we'll do end underscore date equals $ and then same thing. So moment, you call it, and then dot add 7 days, and then dot format dash dash dd. Sweet. So that's super long. I'm going to save and it'll format it nicely for me. Looks like I got an error because I didn't finish out the catch block yet. So this is what it's looking like, just to recap really quickly. So here is the games, the get all games. Then we're using some query parameters where we're going to look for the team IDs that match the arguments that we give it. And then we're also tacking on the start date, which we are going to format with moment. And we're going to use the end date, which we're also formatting with moment. And now I'll use this to find the end of my try block. Cool. So there's the response. Data equals await response. We're going to return data dot data dot data. And then we're going to catch any errors just like we have been, console.error. All right, so that cleaned up our little mess there. All right, so let's test this out. So notice they've been getting increasingly complicated, but it's just to show you how simple and how powerful GraphQL can be. So now we have team games. and team games takes in an ID. Let's say 5. And now let's see what we want. Home team score, visitor team score, home team, city, and name, and visitor team, city, and name. And let's see what we get. All right, so we're getting some information here. Let's see. So we got the Pistons and the Nuggets and the Pacers, Wizards and the Pistons. Let's check out and see what date we're getting here. February 2nd, January 19th. The ID, the team ID. Let's check this really quickly. So the team ID equals, we'll return team ID 1. So this should be team ID 5, which is interesting because we're getting a few different teams here. So let's see if we clear this out and see what information that we get if we just do let's do the home team and see who we get. So this should give us a range within a week behind and a week ahead. Pistons, Nuggets, Wizards. And then let's do the date. All right, so February 2nd, and it's going back January 20th. Okay, so it looks like it's within our given range. This is actually something that we were going to use on the client side to help us with getting specific games by date for specific teams. So again, just to show you how powerful GraphQL can be, utilizing, obviously, like this is not specific to GraphQL, but utilizing string interpolation to access different parts of an API. And again, we structured this so that we have the potential to get all of this data back. But if you don't want or need all of it, you don't have to call all of it. And so this is all cool and all well and good if you just want to pull some data, but this doesn't look very nice, and you wouldn't be able to show this on the client side anywhere. And so what we're going to do next is connect this with a client side with React. So that's going to be a separate video. Go ahead and take a break, and then come back for the next video for part 2, where we set up our server to connect with a client through React. All right. See you in the next one.